So if you follow me, then you probably know that I'm really into making generative music, or music that I suppose writes itself, or a sort of algorithm that writes music that you could listen to. And you could travel a couple years back on this channel and see over 3 hours of me talking about how to make generative music using everything from simple Boolean algebra to melody assistance software, all the way to deep learning and artificial neural networks. My mixing room here is just really crowded at the moment, and I just have a lot of stuff set up. And I've also had my Disklavier, or MIDI robot piano, tuned and serviced recently for a session with Machine Drum. So I thought it would be the perfect time to dedicate an entire weekend to making the ultimate generative patch, utilizing a whole bunch of synthesizers, generative sequencers, modules, effects racks, and so on. So yeah, I am aware that this is gear porn, but I do not see you leaving. I think that you kind of like gear porn. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell anybody. So enjoy this massive generative patch, and I will briefly explain a bit about how it was set up afterwards. Okay, so starting from the beginning, this is going to get really dorky really fast. I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in. The initial clock, or the heartbeat of the whole thing, is coming from the Noodler, which is a multi-channel generative sequencer. So that clock is multiplied and branched into two parts. And the first one is going into the Ardcore module that runs a basic Arduino program that I wrote in C that adds a specific amount of latency depending on the clock rate to compensate for, well, physics. You see, when using a Disklavier or a MIDI-controlled piano, the piano hammers aren't instant like a synthesizer. Playing a soft note takes up to 200 milliseconds for the hammer mechanism to actually hit the string. So it is impossible to perfectly sync a MIDI piano in real time. However, my way of getting around this is to just add latency so everything triggers on time a bar ahead, minus the latency created by the hammer mechanism. I hope that makes sense. I can't really think of a way to draw an example of this. So the other branch of the noodler clock goes to Pamela's new workout, which drives various gates, ADSRs, LFOs, and things like the West Coast Random Source, which is like a sample and hold amusement park. So our main instrument that you hear from the modular is actually Mutable Rings, which is a car plus strong string and bell synthesizer. Every single variable of rings is being slightly changed over time by a random source or an unclocked LFO. Rings then goes into an input on an AD, or analog to ADAT rack unit, and then into a channel on the Eventide H900 where it goes through a delay and diffusion algorithm. Now back to the noodler. One MIDI channel, the drone, which is basically a root note, is going into the Polybrute. I never really used a Polybrute for analog bass sounds before, and oh boy, did it exceed my expectations. The pad channel from the noodler goes into the Hydrasynth, and on the Hydrasynth there's a fair amount of LFOs affecting LFOs affecting LFOs and so on. So the pad it is playing is a bit of a life of its own. Alright, so if you remember that Arduino thing I wrote, the latency modified clock of the noodler is going through a MIDI splitter to a Polyend Seq and Polyphase on the iPad, which is an extremely deep generative app. The Polyend Seq is generating velocity CC messages, and Polyphase is generating notes on the Disklavier. The piano itself is being recorded with a Rode ambisonic microphone, which is going into a Zoom F6, which is encoding it, and that's being recorded on both SD and also being routed back into an RME interface, and then subsequently the H900. Alright, so Pamela's new workout is creating generative rhythms on 2 gate outputs so that on the long cables all the way down on the bottom of the piano, there are 2 Polyend Percs that are triggering to bang on the bottom of the piano, or an empty tub of Tide Pods that I had for dinner. That was being mic'd by the Lauten Audio LS208 running into a Zoom H8 and bleeding into the ambisonic microphone on the piano. The Lauten headed back into the RME interface and subsequently the H900. The noodler wasn't doing all of the work though. The MIDI clock was coming out of it and going into the generative workhorse sequencer known as the Squarp Pyramid, and that was controlling the Yamaha Montage, which had a channel with a pad where there were some warm chords that were being played, and then a chimey bell emulator that uses machine learning to generate touch points and can be modulated a bit like a wavetable with 8 operators, physical modeling, and up to 64 algorithms. Finally, the main heart of the melody came out of this little guy, my barely working DIY Ornament and Crime module. The Ornament and Crime created 4 quantized melodies driven by a fractal that loop themselves only by changing a very small portion of the loop each time, thus sounding a bit more familiar harmonically to us humans, since we loop things constantly when we write music. Alright, so what do you think? Give it to me straight, no double talk. Did you like it? How'd I do? Was it worth the time? If you had all of this gear, would you trade it for a Tesla? Would you trade it for a Bitcoin? Would you trade it for a new house? Would you trade it for a good, honest man? That doesn't even exist. I don't know, at some point when I was making it, it gave me the chills, which I suppose is a pretty good milestone that us humans try to reach when we make music. My alternative plan was to either play Cyberpunk, replay some of Fallout New Vegas, or plan and pack for the trip I'm about to leave on. By the way, if this video just came out and it's super fresh, if you're watching this 0 day, thank you for being such a good customer, and also I am in the desert right now shooting my next video, which is gonna be epic. All right, I'm gonna try and say this really fast like the Micro Machine guy. And as always, if you like this video, subscribe to my channel if there's anything you want me to cover in the future. And as always, if you like this video, subscribe to my channel if there's anything you want me to cover in the future. Let me know in the comments if you want to join a really kick-ass community with everything from unreleased music to behind-the-scenes footage to game servers to a Discord community to songwriting challenges. My Patreon is for you, and you could sign up for as little as $1. Thank you for watching. I love you. I feel like the Micro Machine guy probably had a script to read from, but I'm kind of just freestyling here, and I think I'm not really doing that bad of a job, so okay, bye.